This is Peter,
And this is Tom.
and you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast.
Well, today I guess we decided we're going to kind of take a break from a lot of the American history, a lot of the politics that we somehow look at, and we're going to look at a little bit of world history, and we're going to dive into the most famous pharaoh of our time, not of his time, but of our time, and that would be the boy king known as King Tutankhamun, otherwise known as King Tut.
Yep. Great point you brought up is everywhere I research, he was like the most, or rather the least significant pharaoh out of all of them in his time. He even
I
got
give him
gypped like in
nothing.
his tomb. They said they gave him like a little tomb. And now he is the most famous of all, right?
Most
Which
well
is,
known, yeah, probably next
yeah,
to I guess, yeah, even other than Ramses, I guess, but he's probably more. Ramses doesn't have a sung a comedy song by Steve Martin named after him.
true that. True statement again. So today we are going to talk about obviously King Tut. Figure we'll kind of run through just discussing briefly like what Egypt was like at the time. Then we'll get into a little bit of background of King Tut, but then we'll really get into his death and discovery of his tomb, because that's really when he becomes popular. I think the fact that we have mummy movies from silent era 1920s all the way through to the latest mummy movie, the whole mummy craze really stems from the discovery of King Tut's tomb.
It's just that Egyptology craze. Yeah, it's really can be traced back, and it's still big today, which we can
Yep.
get into.
Just kind of briefly talking about Egypt at a time. Egypt, scholars kind of divide the history of ancient Egypt into three different main periods. You have the Old Kingdom, which is about 2575 BC to about 2130 BC. Then you have the Middle Kingdom, which is about 1938 BC to 1630 BC. And then the New Kingdom, which is about 1539 BC to 1075 BC. And it is in this New Kingdom in which King Tut lives. So, structure of government, kind of as you alluded to it, Tom, even with the Old Kingdom, right? Egyptian rulers that were later called pharaohs organized like a strong centralized state, and these guys pharaohs were believed to be forms of gods. The Great Pyramids that we know today were actually built during the Old Kingdom time. And then when the Middle Kingdom kind of came about, you had a lot of invasions of Egypt, and it was kind of like the weaker time until you have the New Kingdom, where you have a very strong leadership, and kind of Egypt hits its highlight, I guess, of its history. A very important religion in Egypt. There are a lot of different gods, but the main god was the chief god of the sun, Amun Ra. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Egypt itself was a very sun-drenched land, right?
Oh, it's
So
a desert.
obviously,
Yeah, you're in the
yeah,
desert. I mean, you're by the Nile. They don't have it up being on the Nile, but you're going to worship the sun. The sun is going to have such an effect on your life. It's going to become that main deity, and that's something that is important to understand. Is that they are this polytheistic culture. They have all these different gods, and we're going to get into that because King Tut's father actually
yes,
changes that, and that's one reason why the pharaoh, what was his name, Akhenaten,
yep,
Akhenaten, he was disliked so much, and that's one reason why after he died, King Tut will take over when he's only 9 years old.
yep. And actually, people were very happy that he died.
Yeah, they were happy he died because he was so controversial. Because he got rid of that polytheistic and made it one single god, the
Yep,
sun god Aten.
yep. So what he essentially ignores, which is again so entrenched in history of Egypt, is the two other really known gods, right? You have Osiris and the goddess Isis. And the idea here is that to Egyptians, Osiris was especially important, right? He ruled over the underworld, but he was also the god of the Nile. So in that role, he controlled the annual floods that made the land fertile. There's these Egyptian views of afterlife. Ultimately, there's a strong belief in afterlife that it is very much similar to like life on Earth, and this becomes important when we talk about mummification, specifically because to give the soul use of its body in the afterlife, Egyptians perfected rather different skills in mummification because they wanted
It's
to
yeah,
preserve the
it's
dead
also why
bodies.
these tombs are so elaborate and there's so much stuff inside of the tombs. It's because they believe that the body, the mummy, needs all these things in the afterlife. That's where they're going to spend eternity is in this tomb. So that's why there were so many things placed in there.
Yep. And kind of going back real quick to these other gods, To win eternal life, there was this idea that Egyptians believed that each soul had to pass a test, and after the dead was ferried across the lake of fire to a hole of Osiris, the god weighed each soul's heart against the feather of truth, and those that he judged to be sinners were fed to the like a crocodile-shaped eater of the dead, I guess. And then the worthy souls entered a happy field of food. Anyway, to survive this dangerous journey through the underworld, this kind of I remember coming up in the movies, the mummy movies. Egyptians relied on the Book of the Dead, which contains
Yep.
spells, charms, and like other magic formulas that meant to help the dead in the afterlife. But as we said, they mummified them and put so many things into those tombs so that way people could enjoy their afterlife per se. So I think before we get to Tut, last thing, as you already mentioned, is his father, right? Ken, not Tun.
Akhenaten. Akhenaten.
Let's go for it. Sounds good. You say that better, right? Well, I could say his wife is an easier name. Nephrodite, right? That's good
Yes.
to know.
Well, what about
So
interesting? Yeah, about his
no,
wife was that his Akhenaten's wife was also his sister.
yes,
And that's something that's very important when it comes to King Tut. Really, all of Egypt is that brothers and sisters marrying was very very common, and they wanted to
yes,
keep the royal bloodline. Even and that really because King Tut's parents were brother and sister, his DNA would just he had a lot of issues, which we'll get to. And even
yes.
King Tut married his half
His
sister,
sister. Yeah.
and they wound up having two children, which were both born stillborn because of again
So much inbreeding,
inbreeding that was
like a
taking place.
lot, like insanely a lot.
That's just what they believed in. I mean, you had that in European culture too. Maybe not to that extent, but you had a lot of that in
Uh,
European culture with the inbreeding. They would keep within the cousins and stuff like that. They had to
I
keep the
guess in the
royal
ancient
blood pure.
times.
Well, you had to keep the royal blood pure. That was the idea, but they didn't really understand the
Yeah.
genetics behind that.
Yeah. I mean, again, this we're talking about 3,000 years ago here, so obviously slightly different social norms. But yeah, as you
Just a
said, like,
bit,
so
just a bit.
just a bit, right? As you're saying, so Kintut's parents were brother and sister, right? And his dad, as you said, basically kind of threw a poop in a fan here. He orders priests to worship only one god. He removed different names of other gods from the temples. Like this guy went through his entire like try to revolutionize religion. And when he died, it all kind of went back, and people were very excited that he died, which is why they kind of rushed his replacement, and his replacement was his son, um, Tutankhamun, which we know more commonly as King Tut. Therefore, King Tut assumed power at the age of 9.
Yeah, and he had a 10-year reign.
Yes,
So King
right?
Tut comes to power. He's kind of what I was getting a lot of is that his successors after him kind of erase his reign for the most part. They kind of just overlook it. He wasn't really known in history. They knew there was a boy king at one point in history before his tomb gets discovered. But really, all they really focused on, or the big thing that King Tut did, was he did reverse what his father did with having just one god. He does bring in, no, we're going to worship, the priests are allowed to worship multiple gods again. So that kind of becomes his thing. And other than that, he is unique because King Tut is one of the few pharaohs that they do have pictures of, like the carvings and the paintings, and he's always sitting down.
Yes.
And they think that's because he was very tall, but he was also physically frail, and he had a crippling bone disease that left his left foot clubbed, and that's going to be this like the debilitating disease that I know a lot of pictures also have him carrying canes and stuff like that. This is
I
a
think they
young kid.
found actually in his
He
tomb they
actually
found
lived.
130 of
They
his
found a lot of
canes.
canes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another thing we'll get to is his tomb. Well, we'll save that.
We'll
We'll
save
get
that. Yeah, we'll say that. But
that's
yeah,
a
so
teaser.
he
That's a teaser.
as a teaser, no, but as you mentioned, and I think a lot of the sicknesses that he was dealing with was due to the fact of inbreeding.
Yeah, I think he had malaria. They said like over
That
12
was like
times.
bad, yeah, like really bad. We could find all this out from CAT scans and stuff. I mean, it's insane the
Yeah, what they
technology
do.
we have.
Yeah,
Some people try to figure out how and why he died.
yeah.
And the reason for that is because once he is found, they actually find a hole in the back of his skull. And they try to think like, was he assassinated? Like, did someone
And I
assassinate him?
remember
But
hearing that when we learned about him in school years ago, obviously a long time ago. They
yeah,
said, "Oh, they think he might have been assassinated, a blow to the head." But then the research that I was doing for this, they were saying that they don't really think that was the case as much anymore, right? They're
yeah,
saying that hole in the back of his head was probably done during mummification, right, to remove like the
yeah,
brain and things like that. And they think he probably died from an infection in his leg.
yeah. They said it was so bad that when they did, they were able to tell. This is another thing that's crazy. They were able to tell that the infection in his knee and in his leg was so bad. The wound was so bad that it was actually still open when he died because when they were mummifying him, right? They said there's like traces of that oil and stuff they put on him go seeping through that area, which means that he had an open wound. And they're trying to figure out that maybe potentially he died in like a chariot race because they're trying to figure out what could cause such terrible damage to a knee. They said it wasn't like he just kind of fell or hit something. Like this was like a forcibly broken knee that happened during his lifetime, which is what kind of made people, and he died from that ultimately. I mean, it was a bad
Well,
infection.
yeah, and they're saying one reason why he could have got that injured, I don't know if you saw this, was actually from a, and this was kind of weird. Well, I mean, everything about this is kind of weird or different, I
Yeah, I
guess.
was gonna say
Is he died in an ostrich hunt?
what?
That because he loved to hunt ostriches. That's what they said, and it was a big thing. One of his most it's also buried with him was this ostrich fan feather was discovered lying in his burial chamber close to his body. And what they realized is that ostriches were like very very important birds, animals in ancient Egyptian culture. They would the royal sport was allowed to hunt them to kind of show the pharaoh's control over nature and things like that. And they think that during one of these hunts that he probably was injured. It could be an accident because they would chase him with like chariots, the ostriches, because they're so fast
What?
and like hunt them down. I think that it was probably an accident, and that's one way that they think he could have died. Or like at least
So he
got
is,
hurt, and then
yeah.
they hurt the leg, and then the infection spread, and his body was so weakened from being inbred and for also having malaria so many times.
So let's get into the discovery of King Tut.
Being in the Valley of the Kings, he's actually the smallest of all those tombs. So it's
Yep.
just important to keep that in mind as we're talking about how big this tomb actually is and all the artifacts and all the things that are in this tomb. It is big, and they all these hundreds and hundreds of artifacts,
It took him 10
priceless.
years,
Yeah,
10 years to catalog, take everything out and catalog it, and that can say
yeah.
it, catalog everything.
But then just got to
And
imagine
10
how.
years.
But this is nothing compared to the other tombs
Yep.
that existed that we know existed before. And one of the only reasons that we even found King Tut's tomb, and a lot of people say, okay, it was never touched. Actually, it was kind of semi-touched before, they believe, or semi-robbed
At some point, yeah.
at some point. But the only reason is that whoever was doing that caused a cave-in, and they also when they were building, when I say they, the architects, when they were building a tomb for another pharaoh, actually caved in part of King Tut's tomb and kind of
Yep.
buried it. And
Yeah,
that's
because
what
we keep
they,
on we need to keep on reminding ourselves this was 3,000 years
yeah,
ago.
they found
So
out
so like
3,200 years
civilizations.
later. Yeah,
Exactly. Civilizations have lived in that area for 3,000 years after this, which means he was buried like under new civilizations, more or less, that did different things. Actually, quite frankly, when he was found, so he's discovered in 1922, right?
yes.
It was November 4th, 1922. A guy that finds it is
Howard Carter.
Howard Carter. Yeah, he's a British archaeologist. So what happens is this wealthy guy's been sponsoring him for like, I think says to Carter worked in Egypt for like 30 years before he found King Tut's tomb. And he had this crazy idea that like there is this tomb because he kept on finding like little cups and other things with hieroglyphics stating the King Tut. And not much was known about King Tut. So he's like, I think there's another tomb. I think there's another tomb. And by then, all the tombs were pretty much found. He finally convinced his sponsor for just one more season in 1922. And it is in his final season with his last money that he had that his workers exposed basically steps. They found a few steps. But what's interesting is they found these few steps to King Tut's tomb
Yeah,
underneath like already ancient workmen's huts at the base of a tomb of another pharaoh. So it's like you're talking like hundreds of years after another pharaoh built, his work people's, I guess, homes and huts in that same area above King Tut's tomb. So while Carter's looking through these huts, they discover one step and then he clears it off. And then he's like, wait, there's another step. And he clears it off and he's like, holy crap, like there's actual steps going
going
below.
down. Yeah, and that's when a
That's
lot
when
of
this,
the excitement starts
yeah. Well,
about King
first of all, he
Tut's tomb.
stopped. So they fill it up with sand. And because of the nature of the beast here, again, he's being sponsored by this super wealthy Brit. Um, he has to send a telegram to England and he's like, all right, you got to come down here. So they waited 3 weeks before they actually started to uncover those steps all the way down. They waited for the wealthy guy to come in there. Yeah, there's like different chambers to get into. There's like an outer chamber, there's another chamber before, and then from the main room, there's like another room. I mean, this isn't like one little tiny cave. Like, no, this is like a very elaborate tomb.
And when they get in, there's several rooms. So they break the seal. That's when they know. They get inside. Supposedly, they said this big rush of air came, which makes sense
Hmm.
because almost like a vacuum hit him in the face, and that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later. I guess we want to get to the whole idea of the Pharaoh, the curse of the Pharaoh, right? The
Yep.
Pharaoh's curse and things like that. And when they get inside, they start to basically just see all of these artifacts out of behind. So they know it's a Pharaoh's tomb right away. Like he
Yep.
knows this is King Tut's. Saying one of the most famous things they eventually find, is probably the most iconic, is that shoulder to head helmet, whatever you want to
Golden
call it,
mask.
golden mask, which weighs
Yeah.
25 pounds of solid gold.
Yep.
And again, what they realize later on about this is that Tutankhamun's is this was a rushed burial, so it doesn't have a lot of the other things in there. Like he's actually in a second-hand coffin. They believe it was another pharaoh's coffin before it
Yep.
was his. Even though later on even though it's priceless. Like everything from King Tut's tomb today is considered priceless because
I mean, think
it's
about it. It was locked without being opened for 3,000
yeah.
years.
So if you're talking about like seeing like people do like those time capsules where they'll bury
Yeah.
it like, oh, here's a newspaper from 1950. Yeah, that's a long time ago. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but that's nothing compared to 3,000 years ago. You're seeing this was not seen by human eyes since it was
In
sealed.
modern world, in modern
Yeah,
history,
since it
never.
was sealed 3,000 years ago. That's
Yep.
and think about everything that's happened in that 3,000 years, and for this to still be lay there being untouched it's a unique find.
Yep.
It's a
I
unique
mean,
find.
even when they get there's an initial chamber, and then they had to like clear off this long passageway, which is like 26 feet long. There's like these huge statues that are guarding this other door. I mean, this is like super crazy
They said it was
elaborate.
a very unusual tomb how it was made. It doesn't really match up with what they know about other pharaohs' tombs. And again, they think that was because a lot of the stuff in his tomb and his was all borrowed because it was such a rushed burial. Like they didn't speak. He was 19 and think he was going to die. Then he dies. Maybe it was like we said before, from that infection from his ostrich races.
So let's talk about some of the stuff that was there. I mean, they had an actual chariot in there. Like,
Yeah,
well, the
weapons, a lot
idea
of
was,
weapons,
and
canes,
the
like you
idea
said,
was to give him anything and everything that he might want to use in his afterlife. I mean, they said it was loaded with couches, chariots,
food. Don't forget there
weapons,
was food in there.
food. I mean, they literally loaded that entire chamber with like, like, hey, you're gonna chill here in the afterlife, so why not? And that is
Yeah,
often why a lot of these tombs were actually robbed shortly after the pharaohs were buried. So archaeologists believe that there is evidence of his tomb being broken into potentially twice, but they say both times they were broken into was in ancient times, meaning like
yeah.
around the time he was buried.
It was not even during the medieval times. There was a lot like all the Europeans would come and they were into mummies. They would take the mummies and they would ground up the mummies themselves because they thought it was basically like healing properties if they ate or drank or sprinkled on their food the remnants of the mummy. That was a big thing during like the medieval period in
Really?
European. Yeah,
That sounds pretty gross. I'm just throwing that out there.
just a bit.
They finally get through to another chamber, and that's when they find the actual King Tut or
Well, it's like there's an
whatever.
outer coffin, there's an
Yeah,
inner
there's
coffin.
four of them, right? Isn't there like
It's
four
almost like one of
coffins?
those like what are they called? Like when you
Like
open up
those,
the one
like
doll and then it's a
I
smaller
think of
doll.
those doll. Yeah, those Russian dolls.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know. They
yeah.
have a name. Don't
That's what I'm
call them
thinking.
Russian dolls, man. We got to be
Well,
politically
no,
correct.
because they are Russian dolls. There's a
No, they
name
have
for
some.
them.
They have some. Yeah, not Russian dolls. It's an actual thing.
Dude, you know what? Google. I'm going to Google this. So, Matryoshka doll or something?
Mashroshka.
Babushka dolls, dude. That does not sound any more Russian than babushka dolls.
I thought it was.
Please.
I thought it was speaking of an M.
It is. It's like Matryoshka or also
Mashroshka.
known as babushka dolls.
Uh,
Nonetheless, right? So there's four of these coffin-esque tombs, I guess. They say the first one is actually painted in gold. It's made out of wood. And then they opened it up, and then there was another one in there. And then they opened that up, and there was another one in there. It's like four different layers before they finally got to the mummy of King Tut. And within those layers is this very famous all gold face mask, I guess. King Tut is discovered, and as we mentioned before, it takes them there's so much stuff. First of all, this hasn't been touched in 3,000 years. They don't want to ruin this. They're trying to fly this stuff out to Cairo, ultimately, and they start to slowly dismantle everything, but to the extent that even like the furniture and stuff that was in there, they said that it was in there for 3,000 years and it all kind of like caked together, so they
yeah,
needed to like cut pieces apart without damaging them. So altogether it
it's not just like you walk and find this stuff and you can just move it.
yeah,
It's
no,
not.
not at
It's
all.
not. It's not a
So
simple procedure.
as I mentioned before, it took them 10 years to photograph every single artifact and move and clean every single artifact. So even before they got to his body, believe it or not, it took months before they got to his body. Like they decided to move all the other things like out of the way first before they got to the body. So they know it's there and they're just taking their time because honestly, you don't want to screw this up.
No, because you know you're not going to get this again.
No, no, not in this pristine condition, unopened or unmolested for 3,000 years. They also said it was like some of the things. There's broken necklaces there, right?
I thought one of the
There
coolest
was
thing they found was actually a iron dagger. I don't know if you saw that,
no, I
and
did not see
they
that.
say it's famous, Tut's famous dagger. Basically, they actually analyzed it in 2010, and they discovered that the iron blade was actually made from a meteorite.
What?
That was like a really like big thing. That like King Tut's dagger is actually a meteorite from outer space.
I just looked at my notes. It was a year and a half later before they actually lifted the lid off the coffin. By the time they
Yeah,
got to it,
yeah.
which
Imagine just
is
having to
insane.
wait that long because you know you have to
And
like
like
wait.
it's there.
Yeah,
So the autopsy of the mummy of King Tut, they said he was about 5 feet, 5'5", maybe 1/8 of an inch tall. He
He
died
was
at
a small
around,
guy.
yeah, he died around the age of 18. While at first they thought maybe he might have been murdered because of the skull thing, we now know that was not the case. They obviously also found in his burial chamber, they found this box that contained these jars, each of themselves in the shape of Egyptian coffins and elaborately decorated. And these jars held the pharaoh's embalmed organs, like liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Found two small coffins, also simple, undecorated wooden box. Inside the coffins were the mummies of his premature babies. So these were like essentially stillborn babies that were mummified. But I mean, Egyptians mummified their cats. I mean, they mummified
Everything. Yeah,
animals. Yeah,
animals, cats, servants.
yeah, because the idea was like you wanted to bring that with you to your
You need to have
afterlife.
it with you. You need to have it with
Yep.
you. Whatever you
So
needed in your whatever you enjoyed in your normal life, they would then provide for you in your afterlife. That was basically the idea, the logic
yep.
behind it. Yeah.
So King Tut, all of a sudden, I mean, again, this is 1920s. This is front page news,
Oh, it's
rightfully
huge.
so, I would
I don't
say.
know if we can really describe how big of a deal this
Yep.
is. And it stays that way, and it becomes another big deal much later on. In the 70s, it also becomes a big deal again. But people always heard about ancient Egypt. Egypt always had this like lore, especially in the Western world, right? Because it was different, it was exotic, and then they actually have this tomb found undiscovered, untouched for over 3,000 years. It just sent this fury, and then the newspapers went crazy for it. The people wanted to see everything that was going on it, and that really also the sensationalism also then carried into, I guess, what we can talk about now a little bit was the whole idea of King Tut's the curse of the mummy, right? The
Yeah, I
rumored
was
curse.
going to go with the idea of curse. And I mean, the movies picked up on this, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So what? So what's this whole idea of the curse of the mummy?
Well, it was for many years. There's always this curse of the pharaohs, right? And it was probably fueled by newspapers seeking like sales at the time of the
Hmm.
discovery. This big, oh yeah, because it's this whole big thing. And the idea was that there is like a logo or like a warning saying, do not go into the tomb. You will be cursed if you do this. And again, with this Western lore of how crazy Egypt was, or interesting Egypt was, there's all this saying that a lot of the people who were the first ones to enter the tomb all died. What wasn't necessarily the truth. They're also saying that some people did get sick originally, and they think what happened was when that gust of air hit them, that stale air is 32,000 years old, right? Or
Yep.
3,200 years
Yeah,
old,
I was going to
excuse
say
me. Yeah,
3,000.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And plus, like we said before, there was food in there. And that
Yep.
food rotted, and that food had
Ferments and
bacteria,
stuff.
fermented. So there's a lot of bacteria that's coming off of that. So when they're moving around this food that has not been touched for over 3,000 years, and it's just kicking up this dust and this debris, and a lot of them are breathing it in, and they're going to get respiratory illnesses from that.
Did you like look into some of the specific cases though? Some of them were a little freaky.
There were, I'm not trying to cut you off there, I'm sorry. There
No,
were
no,
over
go, go.
58 people who were present when the tomb was opened,
Yep.
sarcophagus itself, right? When they
Yep.
opened that up. That's really the ones that were said, right, you're going to die. 8 died within 12 years after it happened. And if you look
Yep.
statistically, that stuff is going to happen. Now, there were car crashes, right? You had lymphoma. So you had, Howard Carter died of lymphoma in 39, but he was 64 years old, which is
Yeah. No, but
kind of
like
the
the
life
other guys, like
expectancy
so
back then.
which guy did you talk about the car accident guy? Which one was that?
I know there was someone with a car accident.
Where George Herbert,
Yeah.
right? the guy that financed this whole thing dies like months after it's discovered
Oh, you
because
said that,
this
yeah.
is kind of crazy. He tears open a mosquito bite while on his face while shaving, and it ends up like poisoning his blood. It was a blood poison issue, and he dies shortly thereafter. This is like months after
He
the
died five
discovery
months
of the
after,
tomb.
yeah.
And then you have Sir Bruce Ingram. He was an archaeologist who discovered the tomb along with Howard Carter. Interesting, this is kind of weird too. So Carter, who is the guy credited for discovering the tomb itself, gave Ingram paperweight, right, as a gift, and the paperweight was actually consisted of a mummified hand wearing a bracelet, and that was like supposedly there was like a little inscription on it that said, "Cursed be he who moves my body." Anyway, Ingham's house burns down to the ground literally like weeks after he receives this gift. And when he tries to rebuild it, the house is hit with a flood. So they're saying that's part of the curse. Then you have George J. Gold, who was a wealthy American financier that kind of helped.
He developed a big fever, right?
Yeah. And immediately afterward, he fell sick. He visited a tomb in 1923, and then he gets super sick and dies from pneumonia like months later. Then you have Aubrey Herbert, half brother of the guy that financed King Tut's entire expedition. He winds up getting an infection of his teeth and dying shortly thereafter. Then you have Evelyn White, Hugh Evelyn White, a British archaeologist, visited Tut's tomb. They say he might have helped excavate the site, but perhaps not. Anyway, shortly after seeing King Tut's tomb, he decides to hang himself, and he writes in his own blood, apparently, near where he hangs himself, "I've succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." So there is some like crazy, and I'm not even done. Like there's more. The radiologist that X-rayed King Tut got sick and died literally the next day after he was done X-raying his body.
Yeah, don't mess with mummies' tombs, I guess.
Right. The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, the Mummy trilogy. I really enjoyed the first one. They like totally destroyed the whole CGI aspect of the Rock in the sequel, but I really loved the first one.
We cannot say anything negative about The Rock.
I know, but have you seen that's some
He's
bad
Yes, I
CGI, bro?
saw it, well, that was what? That was a while ago. They don't
Well,
have the
yeah,
stuff
but I
anymore.
would have expected more. But the first one's really good. I'm not even talking about the original, Mummy movies from like the 30s. Those were good too. But trying to get my kid to watch this, and Luke, he's probably like 10 at the time, 11, and it's a PG-13 movie. I mean, I guess it was a stretch, but like 20 minutes in, he's like, "Dad, you got to shut this off. This is scary." And I'm like, "It's the Mummy with Brendan Fraser. What are you talking about?" Anyway, I literally just asked him this afternoon because I knew we were going to record this. I'm like, "Hey, bud, you want to watch this with me?" And he's like 13, and he's like, "No, Dad, that's cool. I don't want to watch it." I'm like,
No,
"It's
they don't. Yeah, I mean,
PG-13."
it's not. It doesn't hold up like you said, probably with the special
Yeah,
effects
come
and
on.
everything like
I
that
know.
now.
He's like afraid
But
of this.
you got to remember that this goes in phases. So I think they did make a mummy movie not too long ago with
There was one with
Tom
what's his
Cruise.
face, Tom Cruise,
Tom
right?
Cruise,
Yeah,
actually. Yeah, they were gonna like redo like the Universal monsters and stuff like that. I guess another big it was a huge revival right in the 20s of Egyptianology right in the United States. And
yeah,
another big one in the 70s because what happened is it's very rare for this to happen. That's why one reason why it becomes such a big deal is that the Egyptian government allows a lot of the artifacts to actually tour the world. In the 70s, they actually come to the United States, and there's this traveling exhibition you can actually go to and see it, and a lot of it was shown on television. And so people were all obsessed with King Tut, King Tut. And then again, I think we talked about it before, mentioned it on a Saturday Night Live. Steve Martin sang his song King Tut in 1978 live, and that kind of just again spurred on this Tut phenomenon, made him become more of
yeah.
a pop icon than anything else. But now the artifacts, the actual mummy itself, it did come to the United States. When was it? Probably in the mid 2000s. I remember actually going to see it in New York City, but what's crazy is you go there, you're like, wow, this is King Tut's this is the mask. And they tell you now that there was only 3 artifacts that were there, I believe, that were actually from the tomb. And it was like small stuff
Yeah,
like
they actually
toys.
keep everything in Egypt. They
None of it
don't
leaves
doesn't
Egypt anymore. None of it leaves
nothing
Egypt.
leaves
And it
Egypt.
hasn't
Yeah,
even been on display. It wasn't even on display for a couple of years. They put it back out from 2011, 2019. It wasn't even on display because they had to create this almost like a vacuum chamber because people were coming in, like the humidity from the people's bodies and stuff like that was causing the decay of the mummy itself. So
yeah,
now it's the mummy itself is in like this glass chamber. And when we went to go see it in New York City a couple of years ago, it looks like the mummy. It's a replica of the mummy, but it's not the real mummy. And
yep.
everything in there is pretty much a replica because the Egyptian government doesn't loan this stuff out. It says no, it stays in Egypt now. It stays at the area known as Luxor in Egypt. That's where they keep a lot of these mummies' tombs and things, the
It's just
remnants.
crazy. I mean, I would love to go to Egypt. I feel like before I die, it's one of those things
I've
that I
known
just
people
want to
that
hit.
have gone. They said it's a worthwhile trip. Yeah.
I would think, right? They've done so many studies on the body of King Tut since then.
Oh, they've actually done like they recreated what he would look like today, like the
Yet they
scales and
like
everything.
clubfoot and everything. Like they completely recreated him, and that's basically through different CT. So in 2005, they did an entire CT scan of his whole body, which ultimately shows not just bones but like living tissue as well. And again, technology is it's crazy. I mean, to the extent that it showed that like his right foot was flat and his left foot was clubbed, and then he suffered a bone disease, and that
I had malaria so many times, like just for the fact that they were able to tell all this. Yeah, it's
yeah,
crazy.
just from like again from a
From a
mummy, like
3,000-year-old mummy, but yeah,
which is insane. Now, if you're an archaeologist, you don't really have access to his mummified remains. But what they did is they actually scanned his entire body. They made the CT scan available, and if you're an archaeologist that wants to do studies on his body and on the mummy, they bring you to this flat screen TV that is as large as the actual coffin was. So it's huge. Like it's the size of the real life person. And as you come up to this thing, you get to like click on the screen and it pops up like the mummy's remains. It's all virtual. And it's not just
you
like
can see
for
it.
like you or me to go and play around with. No, you need special access just to even get to those files because you're standing in front of like a digitized full scale replica of King Tut's remains. And then you could literally like move it upside down, over. Like, I mean, this entire thing, I saw a documentary on it and it's insane. It's like, hey, don't touch the body. You don't need to because we completely digitized it.
Again, because if someone touches, they want to keep that body, no one touch it. It's such a national treasure and it's priceless. Just having people near it as we just breathe, the condensation, stuff like that, it's going to deteriorate it.
Yep.
It's just they do the same thing with the Declaration of Independence, right? You know how that's not always out in display. A lot of times it's like a fake one that's out there, or
Oh,
it's
yeah.
on like the UV light because just the normal lights are just decaying the document. It's just paper. This is a lot older. You know, King Tut's a lot older than the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah. To say the least. All right. I mean, I think that's a pretty cool introduction to King Tut.
Yeah, I think we were able to touch on some aspects of his life, touch on some aspects, and really how he became much more famous in his death than his life. Yeah, that's probably they can take away from
Absolutely.
because the successors after him pretty much tried to erase him, and he was the last of his line. He didn't have any offspring of his own that survived, and so he was the last of his line. When he dies, his family lineage dies too, and the pharaohs, the power that the people who gave him the power after him, pretty much erased him from history. There was very little known about him until after they recovered his tomb in 1922.
One last thing that was I found kind of interesting is that most of the tombs that have been uncovered have been raided so many times by thieves, essentially, that we really don't have a lot of artifacts from like the real big known pharaohs. But we have it from this like little known pharaoh, King Tut. And they're saying that just the riches in this modest, I guess, by comparison, tomb makes us imagine of what riches were stolen over the years from all the
Yeah.
other tombs.
Because again, everything that they found there is prices. A 25-pound gold, helmet, basically, right?
Yeah.
And all these other things, over 5,000 artifacts, and they're saying that is nothing compared to what like would have been in Imhotep's tomb or Ramses II's tomb.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Nuts.
again, we'll never know. It's because he was such this small, nothing, forgotten history, insignificant, basically crippled king that we were able to find all this stuff that he had that it was left undiscovered.
Anyway, I guess that pretty much sums up our little episode of on King Tut.
King
I,
Tut, yes.
I said little. I feel like no pun intended because he was kind of a smaller dude. But hey,
Well,
no pun intended there.
we bring the facts.
That's right. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening and tuning in to our podcast. As always, the pleasure is all ours. And as always, we would invite you guys to continue listening and tuning in every week. And also, do not forget to subscribe wherever it is that you listen to this podcast. And also, if you want to contact us, please feel free to do so. We are available in multiple places. You could find us on Facebook at History Teachers Talking Podcast, and you could find us at historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com, as well as on Twitter and Instagram. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for listening, and we'll see you guys next week. Enjoy.
Take it easy. Be safe.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.
Are you noticing your car insurance rate creep up even without tickets or claims? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry handles the legwork by comparing quotes side by side from over 50 top insurers so you can confidently hit buy. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Jerry even tracks rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Don't settle for higher rates. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/libsyn today. That's jerry.ai/libsyn.